Western.
Howdy.
Howdy, William. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Doing all right. And yourself this fine morning?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, so I want to be clear on pronouncing your name. How do you pronounce your last name?
Westerhout.
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 Yeah. And sometimes I joke and call him Westerhout. But his name actually is Westerhout, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And your family came from where did they come from originally?
Originally, the Netherlands migrated to Singapore and then eventually over to the United States of America back in 1915.
Okay, so you're a mix of the Netherlands and Asia, basically.
Yes.
Okay. What percentage? Are you more European or more Asian?
Definitely more European. My mother's side has got a lot of British and some other things in there as well. So I'm mostly European with a little touch somewhere of Asian.
Nice. I'm mostly European, although I also have Native American isms, I guess, some Cherokee and some Sioux in me. And of course, 15,000 years ago, they crossed the land bridge from Asia, so I guess I'm a little bit of Asian myself, in a weird way. So we have a lot to discuss, and we don't know exactly how much we're going to be able to discuss within this short hour, but we'll probably bring you back for some different episodes, assuming that you think this goes well. What do you think?
No, I think so.
Okay, so why don't we start with how we met? Do you remember that?
I do indeed.
Yeah, where did we first meet?
We first met actually at my church. I am a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, and if I remember correctly, you were, let's see, my goodness, it was, 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, something like that, we met. Yeah, and we, let's see, I was actually at a Bible study, I believe, and you were there at that Bible study. What you were doing, as far as I can recall, was you were trying to get an idea of who Seventh-day Adventists were and what we were like, what our culture is like.
Yes. Yeah, and so here's how I got down there, just so the audience knows. So I've always been interested in health and longevity and what makes people live the longest with, free of disease. And for a long time, I thought I had a pretty good idea of what a good diet was. I thought I had a pretty good idea of, what one needed to do to be healthy and to live long. However, and to a certain extent, I had probably gotten most of that right. But on the second look, I feel that maybe I missed something. So I had been researching longevity studies. And the first, the question that I had was, what makes people live long? And why? And as I was looking about that question, but not only that they live long, but that they're free of human disease and that they live long. So they're in a good condition. I came upon a concept called the blue zones. And the blue zones were geographic areas of the world that National Geographic had sent out a scientific expedition to look for where people live the longest. longest. And so they found 5 blue zones, which they called the blue zone. And most of those blue zones were outside the United States. So one was in Sardinia, island off of Italy. Another was in Icaria, another island off of Greece. One was in Okinawa, and one they found in an isolated mountain range in Costa Rica. Now, I just happened to live in the United States, and I just happened to live in California, in Bakersfield at the time. And the only other blue zone that they had found at that moment in time was in California. And I didn't know much about it. It was a suburb of San Bernardino. And what was that suburb, William? Do you know?
That would be Loma Linda, California.
Yes, that was Loma Linda. So, but what was interesting is that this whole city, and I was actually fortunate enough to go visit it. So America's only blue zone. So I go down there, and it looks just like any other American suburb. The streets, the houses, there wasn't really anything that distinguished it from, say, a suburb of, I don't know, LA, or, a suburb of any other city, in Bakersfield, for example. But what was different was what were their diet and what they were putting in their mouths. And so I took that information, and I was living in Bakersfield, as I said, and I really wanted to understand what caused Seventh-day Adventists to be the longest living group of Americans. And what was so special about them? What was causing this longevity? And so this is kind of where I met William, and after that we became pretty good friends, I think. And we've had numerous conversations on the subject. And now we really want to share that knowledge with the world of what we learned. Is that right, William?
Absolutely.
So, William, if I had to, if you had to give me the public or the listening people who are listening now, what is it that makes them live the longest?
Well, it's not any one thing. Really, when you boil it down, there's actually 8 different principles that Seventh-day Adventists adhere to, or at least the ones that end up living longer do it, such as those in Loma Linda, that they tend to not just one, such as diet, but they actually attend to 8 different principles. Now, there are a couple of different acronyms that people might be able to look at to get those principles. One of those would be New Start, which is the most commonly known one, whether among Adventists or non-Adventists. That would be nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trust in God. That one is advocated by the Weimar Institute, which is up in Northern California. I've had the privilege of attending there myself, and I believe we'll be discussing that either later on in this program or in another program. But I myself have an acronym that I have put together over I would say last year or so, and it's Restored. Now that one's a little bit different, just a little bit, but the principles are still the same. That's rest, enough water, sunlight, temperance, oxygen, relationship, exercise, and diet. Now those, each of those is very important in an effect, and if you miss one of them, then you're going to actually end up living shorter. That's really what the bottom line is. The Adventists that live the longest and the people that live the longest attend to those different principles. It's not any one thing that really rises above the rest. cumulative way that overall increases longevity and quality of life as well.
Great. And we might have to do 8 podcasts, 1-hour podcasts, just of each one of them, right?
We could easily do 2 or 3 podcasts on each one.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 10. I mean, who knows how many we could do. But why don't we start with, let me just, so could you go over what you said, just for myself and the audience? What were the 8 principles of New Start? What were they again?
Alrighty. That was nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trust, or trust in God. Each one of those principles is advocated and taught, especially at the Weimar Institute. Now, nutrition, of course, would be, did you want me to go over all of them, or did you want me to just kind of give a brief summary of all of them, or?
Yeah, so,
okay.
I think for the first, because I think what's most common, because I also want to do sort of a comparison among the Adventists and the other blue zones, and I think you would agree with me that when we take a look at Icaria in Sardinia, we see that we're getting basically Orthodox Christians living on an island in the Mediterranean, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I believe Sardinia is either Catholic or Orthodox. I'm not sure exactly. Do you know?
I'm not sure either. Likely Catholic, considering it's off the coast of Italy rather than off the coast of Greece.
Yeah, we'll have to take a look at that. But it's either Catholic or Orthodox. And I'm pretty certain that Icaria is Orthodox, because it's a Greek island. So we're looking at 2 possible streams of Christianity, right? As far as the culture goes, Orthodox Christianity and
that Episcopal Christianity, that Episcopalian or whatever it is that you would call it, the hierarchy.
Yeah, and then Roman Catholic Christianity, and then we have in Okinawa, we have essentially people who are Buddhist. We have people who worship rocks or ancestors. So we have a number of, we have a completely different cultural, you could say, background and religion going on.
Yeah.
And then we come to good old Southern California, where we live, and we have the Adventist culture of California. And I think, and then of course the one in Costa Rica, which I believe is also probably Roman Catholic, I'm guessing.
Likely.
So we're getting a lot of different, maybe, influences. We have Protestant Christianity in the Adventist background. We have Roman Catholic Christianity. We have Orthodox Christianity. We have Asian Buddhism. Worshiping possibly the ancestors or ghosts. And yet they're all falling into the blue zone category.
Yeah.
And so I guess the commonality, as far as if we were to say cultural commonality, is that these people have communities of health. They can talk to each other. They also have purpose, life purpose. So there isn't a sense of, isolation, or a sense of not understanding of why they exist and what their purpose here on the earth is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so maybe life purpose is an important thing. But I think what's also common is what they're putting in their mouths. Would you agree with that?
So there's a definite commonality in there as well.
Right. And what's putting them, and just to ask you a question, because you're sort of, we haven't got into your credentials. We should probably. Well, you're sort of almost an expert on this subject. Are they on a paleo diet? What are they eating?
Actually, for the most part, those diets are eating a plant-based vegetarian diet. Now, there are, they do eat a little bit of meat or animal products occasionally, but by and large, they are vegetarian plant-based. With very rarely, you'll have some cheese or some milk, or you'll have some meat somewhere thrown in there, maybe some fish, depending on where it is. But by and large, they are plant-based, and the majority of their diet actually is starches, if you look at most of them, which is an interesting contrast to what a lot of people teach these days.
Right, so it's essentially a high, complex carbohydrate / starch diet, low-fat,
Yeah.
low-protein, whole plant-based diet. Would that be
Yes.
correct?
That would be absolutely correct.
Yeah, so, but what about, why can't we just live on meat alone? Like, Eskimos do it, they seem to be okay, I guess, to a certain point, to their 60s. What is it about eating meat alone, or milk, or cheese, or milk, why is that so bad, and why does it even matter?
Well, there's a bit of a controversial study out there. It's controversial not so much because of the study methods, it's because people just don't like what is brought out. That would be a study you're familiar with, the China study. Now, the China study is one of the most groundbreaking studies in the world because it linked diet with health more conclusively than any other study ever had. It had over 70 years worth of research on lifestyle, specifically diet and health. It was basically what happened was Dr. T. Colin Campbell took a look at some data that was collected over China over a period of time, and they looked at disease and animal protein consumption. And it basically came out that the more animal protein that you consume, the more likely it is that you will have diseases, whether it be heart disease or cancer or any number of things. Now, the reasons for those things are varied. Basically, what it all boils down to, it's not just animal protein, it's actually just animal foods in general. Saturated fat that comes from animals is more likely to cause disease than saturated fat that comes from plants. At least this is seeming to be what the research is indicating, although we're not sure. There hasn't been a lot of research on plant-saturated fats. Animals are the only food that contain, animal products are the only foods that contain cholesterol. No plant will have cholesterol, and that's because plants don't produce it. So any food that has cholesterol has an animal product in it, and any animal product that has cholesterol. Dietary cholesterol is perhaps some of the worst cholesterol you can take in, especially if it's oxidized. That's a whole other talk, but that's the most damaging. Then, of course, animal protein is perhaps the worst offender. Most people think, oh, it's the fat, oh, it's the cholesterol, we got to get rid of those things, but it's actually not. Actually, the worst offender is the animal protein. You mentioned those Eskimos before. Eskimos eat almost, at least traditional Eskimos, the traditional Inuit, they eat almost exclusively animal products. They cannot get plants to grow up that far north, except maybe a little bit during the summer, unless they're really, really far north. And in which case, their diet is exclusively animal products. The Eskimos, as an example, they have some of the highest calcium intakes in the world. In fact, if not the highest. They also have some of the highest, if not the highest, osteoporosis rates in the world, which is interesting considering that calcium intake is usually thought to decrease your risk of osteoporosis. However, it's the animal protein. They eat such a high protein diet that it actually really does, it it really does a number on their bones. Higher protein consumption has been linked with calcium loss. And they eat so much protein that in spite of the fact that they get more calcium than anybody else on the planet, they actually will lose so much calcium that they get osteoporosis. They do live into their 60s, but they still die they're still obese and overweight. They still have heart attacks and strokes and things like that, far younger than most people would even in America. And so it's, and of course, because they're Native American, they're more likely to have other things as well, such as diabetes and a number of other health issues, because they live on such a bad diet. The reason they live as long as they do with that diet is because they exercise so much and they have all the other health principles going for them. But, so, really the reason that we can't do this high-protein, high-fat diet is because, basically, how else can I put it? The analogy I like to use is a car. Your body's like a car, and it needs the proper fuel. Best fuel? Gasoline, right, for a car? Well, best fuel for a human being is sugar. That's why we run on blood sugar, right? Diabetes is famous for blood sugar. Well, that's the fuel of the body. That's the main gasoline, if you will. And especially starch. Complex carbohydrates, especially starch, are what fuels our body better than anything else. And when you try and fuel that with protein, it's like throwing transmission fluid in the gas tank of your car. It's not going to run too well, if at all. And generally speaking, it's going to be a nasty burn, leave all sorts of smoke, and even if you can burn it, it just doesn't work. So, that's really the bottom line. As far as that, I hope I didn't get too confusing there.
No, you didn't. I wonder, we live in a time period where the biggest killer of Americans is heart disease, right? I believe that's the top killer.
Yes, it's the top. In fact, it's the top killer in the world right now. Second would be cancer.
And just...
That's a close second.
Yeah, and just talking about heart disease, what is the cause of heart disease? What does science tell us?
Heart disease, well, there's a number of things that cause heart disease, or not cause, but a number of things that are heart disease. There's, of course, atherosclerosis, or the hardening of the arteries. There is blockages that go on when you have cholesterol, fatty deposits inside the arteries. You've got...
So do those build up naturally, no matter what you eat?
No. Well, partly yes, partly no. I'm no physician, so I can't give you an exact answer on everything. But I do know that even in spite of the fact that a lot of people do think that it just builds up over time, but we have people. I'm 22. We have people here in the United States, my age, who have arteries that are already 20% blocked, just because they eat so much fat and they eat so much cholesterol.
And
the bottom line
is that fat and cholesterol, is that coming from oats? Is it coming from whole wheat? Is it coming from an apple? Like, where does all that come from?
That's coming from things like your hamburgers, your French fries, your hydrogenated oils, your peanut butter, as an example, or your margarine, or things like that. Things that some people may even think healthy, but they're saturated or trans fats.
So if I ate a French fry and it wasn't dunked in oil, would that cause a heart attack?
No. If it wasn't dunked in oil, if it was just baked, you would have no problem. It's the dunking in the oil, especially... Now, I'll grant you, a French fry is better than a burger, because the French fry is plant-based, but it has, at least as far as heart disease is concerned, the oils are going to be plant-based. You aren't going to be deep frying them in lard. That's, as far as I'm aware, that's not even allowed anymore, or it's at least culturally looked down upon. But the problem is that when you deep fry a potato, or anything else for that matter, you do create carcinogens. So heart disease isn't the problem there.
So just
it's cancer then.
So just going back then, So you're telling me it's not the apple or the oats or the whole wheat, it's the oil and what?
It's the animal protein and the animal fat. Those are the two problems that,
So you're
more than
saying
anything else.
you're saying that cholesterol building up in the arteries is coming from the animals you're eating?
Partly. There is a lot of cholesterol in the food that you're eating, but the saturated fat in the animal food also stimulates your liver to produce its own cholesterol. So not only are you intaking cholesterol into your body, you are also producing cholesterol through the saturated fat that you're taking in. So what's actually happening is you're working double against yourself with the animal foods there.
So your body is essentially turning against itself by harvesting a collection of more cholesterol because you're eating animal cholesterol, which then, I guess, in the fat turns into more fat or cholesterol producing entities in your body, which adds to the blockage of your arteries.
Yes.
And this causes heart disease.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so
I believe that's a major portion of it.
I was just watching a documentary. It was similar to Forks Over Knives. It's called What the Health. It's on Netflix. I don't know if you've heard of it yet, but it's an interesting thing to watch if you like Forks Over Knives documentary. It pretty much went over the same things. One of the things, though, that it talked about that I didn't quite remember, at least in detail, as much in Forks Over Knives and What the Health, was the cause of diabetes, which is another American killer and worldwide killer.
Yes.
And the way it was explained, you might know a little more, but the way it was explained was essentially you put in the animal fats and the proteins, and then that blocks the arteries and all that. And as you're doing that, if you're eating the sugars, you're just dumping a stream. You're basically, in the when your arteries and everything wasn't blocked, the sugar could break down better. But when you're blocking stuff with fat and all that and cholesterol, the sugar isn't able to break down, and because it's not able to break down, you have all this, basically it leads to diabetes. I don't think I did it justice the way I just explained it, but is that kind of your understanding? Is that as you block?
Not quite.
Okay.
Although the fat, it's similar. Basically, the way I've heard it explained so in a way that people can understand it is like this. With diabetes, you've got two different kinds, of course. You've got insulin-dependent and you've got type 1 and type 2, formerly juvenile onset and adult onset, respectively. Type 1 diabetes is where there's actually a problem with the pancreas. It's been attacked or something like that by your own body, and so it just cannot produce enough of a chemical or hormone called insulin. Type 2 diabetes is where there's actually an overproduction of insulin. That is, that your pancreas is producing more and more and more and more to work with the load. Now, what's going on there? Why are you producing so much? Well, the answer actually lies in the diet, specifically in fat. Now, your cells are like little rooms. I mean, that's where the name cell came from. And if you can imagine for a moment, insulin is like a key that opens up the door into the room for the sugar to get from your bloodstream into the cell.
Right.
Now, what happens is is something called insulin resistance with type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune thing usually. It's totally different. Type 2 diabetes is lifestyle-related one. And that's where if you're eating a lot of fat, you kind of gum up that lock there. So it can't really, it gets sticky. It's kind of the opposite of greasing it, if you will. You're greasing the lock but making it gummy. It just doesn't work as well. And so it takes more insulin to open that door. It's called insulin resistance. And not only are you gumming up the lock, you're actually gumming up the hinges too, so the door doesn't open up very well even if you've unlocked it. So it basically, the sugar just doesn't get into the cells. Why does that happen? Well, the way I like to explain it best is that the cells really, fat is more than twice as calorie dense as sugar or protein. And in fact, it's more calorie dense than both sugar and protein combined. It's 9 calories per gram of fat. Now, what that means is when you eat a lot of fat, your cells get all that energy, and they say, oh boy, I don't need this sugar coming in here. I'm going to let somebody else who needs it take it. You see, your body's cells are very unselfish. And so they say, well, you know what? I'm going to take that away. I'm going to send that away. I don't need that. Send it to somebody else who needs it. But when all your cells say that, where does that sugar stay? In the bloodstream. So your blood sugar rises, your kidneys have to deal with it, and it just makes a big mess. And so basically that's how diabetes type 2 starts, at least the majority of type 2 diabetics, where you have this insulin resistance that's going on. The fat is blocking the insulin from actually opening up the door, which is blocking the sugar from getting into the cell. That's really, as far as I'm aware, that's how it's been explained to me.
Well, thank you, William. We're going to take a break, and we'll continue this in the next part of the interview.